Alright guys, let's do question number 26. Where did the idea of God come from? This is again an argument for the existence of God using an ontological study where we're looking at the beginning or the origin of something. And so I'm actually going to go through and point to three different philosophers. There's Descartes, there's Aquinas, and there's Anselm. They all have different ideas about this, and I want to kind of just give you a taste of some of their thoughts on this subject. So René Descartes was both a mathematician and a philosopher. His breakthrough in the study of geometry led to our modern day GPS. He also is famous for his proof of the existence of the mind, or basically our consciousness. I think one of the quotes that best wraps up Descartes is going to be, "I think, therefore I am." So he was a brilliant guy, and just like the universe. But just to get back to his belief, or his basically his argument for the existence of God based on the idea of God. Just like the universe needs a cause greater than itself, and an idea cannot be greater than the one who thought of it. So Descartes basically built an argument for the existence of God based on the origin of the idea of God. So he starts with the two truths. An idea is either originates from within us or comes from outside of us. Since science states that no effect can be greater than its cause, or our thoughts would be no different. So the perception of a perfect being, such as should not supersede our human potential. So, however, it definitely does. The idea of God is that of an infinite, all perfect being. Since we are limited beings, the idea of God it has to come from outside of us. So, if God contains all the qualities of perfection and infinity, then only God Himself could have caused the idea of God. So that's why he states that God exists, because there's no way of actually coming up with the idea of God unless he actually put it there. It's kind of like a painter's signature. So let's move on to Thomas Aquinas. So he's a famous philosopher of the Catholic Church who created the argument for gradation. So instead of examining the source of the idea of God, St. Thomas is basically asking the question, is the idea of God reasonable? Because that would have been the argument from the atheists of his time, is that they don't believe that God, this idea of an infinite being, is a reasonable argument or statement. So gradation is his answer to this. So it's what is gradation? Well, it's a series of successive changes, stages, or degrees that can be basically detected. So in terms of temperature, you got hot, you got cold, you got the coldest, and you got the hottest extreme. Because of what is, there's this maximal hot or maximal cold. These things are beyond our detection, but they're not beyond our reason. So let's say in terms of numbers, there is infinity small and there's infinity large. An infinite number is basically beyond our perception, but it's not beyond our reason. So it's not unreasonable to think about it something infinite. Among geniuses, there are those who know much and there are those who know more. This idea of someone who knows all it's not very comprehensible, but it's not beyond reason because of gradation, because there are potentials there. Therefore, the idea of God is reasonable. Because of gradation, we know that things such as maximal, infinite, and incomprehensible do exist. And among beings, there are those that are good, and then there's that are more, and then there's more. There's those who are less, and because of gradation, there can be reasonably a maximally good and maximally perfect individual, and that's what we call God. So let's go to Saint Anselm, which is his 11th century work. So he's back there a ways, and he basically uses Psalms 14 verse 1, which states that the fool says within his heart that there is no God. But But by doing so, the fool also acknowledges that there is a God. So Saint Anselm looks at the idea of God and states that if it's even possible that God exists, then it follows logically that God does exist. The idea is that God is a maximally great, all-powerful, all-knowing, morally perfect being within any possible worlds. Now, possible worlds are ways that the world could have been. So imagine, if you will, as many alternative realities as you possibly can. Within these possible worlds, anything can be, including unicorns, flying pigs, and talking animals, provided that it is actually possible. The only thing that can't be is something that is incoherent, because it's not possible in any reality. For example, a married bachelor, or the smell of blue, or a round circle. If God is truly maximally great in one possible reality, then he can technically exist in all possible realities, because that's what maximally great means. And therefore, God must exist in our reality. But this also means that, based on his argument here, that atheists must do more than just disprove the existence of God. They've got to prove that it's impossible for God to exist. The argument holds as long as the idea of God remains coherent, but no atheist, or basically any fool, is going to argue that the idea of God is incoherent. So, how come the idea of a supreme creator is present with some, like Christians and Jews and even Muslims, but not at all like like your Buddhists, or your someone who worships the earth, or or basically pantheists? So my answer would to that to be it's not that the idea can't be present. It's whether or not they choose to accept such an idea. Because, like we read about in Romans 1, it talks about those who choose to worship the created rather than the creator. Just because they do not, or they're not embracing a singular monotheistic ruler, that doesn't mean that the idea or the knowledge of him doesn't exist. It's just that they're choosing to worship the created instead. What would the idea of a creator look like without a creator? It's an interesting thought. Mankind can only imagine what is potentially possible, like an individual who can manipulate the natural elements, which it's why we have the Roman and Greek gods, because that's our own human potential. That's the best we can come up with without the idea of a infinite perfect being. So without that present, of course, to suggest the idea of infinity, or such an idea basically wouldn't exist, and which is why Descartes' argument is very effective, in my opinion. So that's my answer to this question. I love you guys. I'll see you on the next one.